Good morning, everyone. Good morning. It is 10:01. We'll go ahead and get our meeting of the April 26th meeting of the City of Denison Planning and Zoning Commission underway here. And the first thing we do is call to order and verify that we do have a quorum present, so we may proceed. And so the next item will be public comment. Any citizens may speak on the items listed on the agenda. I have a couple that have filled out a request to speak card. When you do come forward, please make sure to state your name and address for the record for us, please. I'll go ahead and start. I have a couple here for Peggy Gardner.
Commission members, my name is Peggy Gardner. I live at 2507 West Washington Street here in Denison.
Can you bring the microphone closer?
Oh, okay.
So,
How's that?
it's on.
Okay. All right. First, I would like to read a little note from one of our neighbors. I got to take a breath. Sorry. Her name is Catherine Cates, and she's not able to be here today because of her age and her physical condition. And actually, we have quite a few neighbors for that aren't able to be here for that very reason. Love to be here and would be if they possibly could. Here's what Miss Caitlin Cates asked. She says, I, Caitlin Cates, an 85-year-old handicapped person, lives at 830 Lane Drive. Before you consider any more building, I wish you would address the drainage problem. Please come take a look at my property and see the erosion caused by the recent build. I get water from the north, south, and west. I'm old and not physically or financially able to repair the damage. I moved to 800 Lane Drive in 1950 with my parents. I love the area and it breaks my heart to see the damage. Please help. Thank you, Caitlin Cates. All right. Now, as for the issues pertaining to the DSH addition that's been proposed, for this event, I'm defining our neighborhood as starting with the upcoming Chick-fil-A at Morton and Lane Drive, going down Walker Street to Ray Drive, and then north on Ray Drive and around to Morton Street again. And this request for the approval of the DSH addition to our neighborhood comes to us in the aftermath of unconscionable actions or inactions of contractors, some city council members, some planning and zoning commission members, and anyone else whose job it was to advocate for the families in our neighborhood. Thank you to whoever took measures to avoid a repeat of such horrendous mistakes. And at this time, there is so little trust in the city's system that we do not, and I say we, this is we, at least most of us that could get here. We don't want anything else to come into our neighborhood without thorough scrutinization. While our established neighborhood is admittedly eclectic, it has a comfortable, cohesive feel to it. Whatever housing comes in will not match, and we really don't want it to. But it can blend. We can have that happen. Ours is not a bedroom community. Some folks have invested over 50 years of their lives there in that neighborhood. And there is almost a sacred connection when it comes to that, putting that kind of time in a particular area. We are realistic enough to know that change is inevitable. It can be good, and when existing families are given consideration and treated with respect, it can go well. We'd like to see the streets in and out of the neighborhood, and any new additions that are going to be made, have those right and wide enough so that while all the construction is happening, we can get to and from our homes. And we don't have to go, I know we're going to have to go through some bumps, But when you have to have a 4x4 to get out of your neighborhood or a helicopter drop you down, it's no fun. It's just not. So then we have, I have a lot of questions, of course, and I don't know if our contractor's here. Is Mr. Humphreys here? Okay, well, we all have lots of questions about the so-called single housing that's going to be going in there. And so maybe I should do that. Questions now or questions later on what this proposed housing, single housing is going to be? Single-family housing? You want to hear that or you want to carry on?
Well, I mean, right now, what is before us as far as regarding the platting of the property.
Okay.
And not as far as what's being, what is being built or what type of that. And, I mean, obviously, we don't have any control over what is being built. The state handcuffs us as far as what type of materials. We can't regulate the type of materials. We can't do a whole lot as long as it's, meets the zoning ordinance. They can build up to, they just have to build up to those standards. And so.
And you have nothing to do with the zoning ordinances?
Pardon me?
Do you all have anything to do with the zoning ordinances?
We do, but we can't regulate, like I said, we cannot regulate building materials or things like that.
I've seen that done here.
That's only if it's a planned development or it's within a highway overlay district. Otherwise, the state of Texas has said cities cannot regulate what type of building materials and so forth can be used. So,
all right.
unfortunately, that change happened a couple of years ago, and so it's really handcuffed the city as far as being able to say, this is what you can do, this is what you can't. Only in situations where you're in a highway, or like an overlay district, in which generally those were only what was existing prior to the law, or in, planned developments when the, kind of the developer comes in with a larger tract of land and, they submit it as a planned development. Did I address that correctly? Yeah.
Okay.
So, as far as what types of homes on there, we really do not have any type of say as far as, there's minimum size requirements and setback requirements and things like that, but otherwise, we are not able to dictate.
Can I make a comment? Sure. Real quick one? This is outside what we're able to do here, but some of the issues that you bring up are really outside of planning and zoning. They would be other groups, other staff members that could address the problems. Like, as an example, getting down the roads. I know what it was like getting to THF Park when there were houses being built on both sides of the road. You couldn't find a road you could get down. It just was impossible. So
Exactly.
I can understand your problem.
Okay.
But that's not what we can address here, but there are others who could address that for you.
Okay. Well, then I'm going to finish and just say this is a heads up. And I will also, I feel confident that nothing in Denison is set in stone. So whatever changes can be made or should be made, I think that we are all going to make every effort to see that we have to look out for ourselves.
Sure.
Because our neighborhood, nobody's been looking out for us. And like I said earlier, what happened, and you can just drive down there like Miss Kate said, come look. It is horrendous what has happened. So, and it's particularly, we have one neighbor, lovely home. It was their honeymoon home. They had a child there just recently, and it's a single-family home for real. On one side, he's got 3 two-story duplexes, and on the other side, a 2-story duplex. That man is so in trouble. He'll never sell that house. He will not enjoy it. He has a 6-foot wood fence, which is futile. People will look from their 2-story bedroom and watch whatever he gets to do in his backyard. So that's the kind of thing we are wanting to stop here. And I hope you'll just hear me out.
Sure.
It's not that much longer, I promise.
I want to address one thing there.
Certainly.
As far as the city has incorporated changes as far as the duplex and not just being able to automatically do duplexes, now where before in a lot of those areas, they were able to do it by right and didn't have to have any type of approval or anything. And that part of it has been changed.
That is unconscionable. Again, that we've got that right in, I mean, everywhere, everything that could be wrong, we live in it, right there. So anyway, furthermore, the fact that the DSH addition abuts the Coffin Lane Cemetery is very troubling. Civil War soldiers, so many babies, and historically significant people are buried in the Coffin Lane Cemetery. It has a Texas history marker in it. Through the city's Adopt a Park program, a little handful of us have been working in the cemetery over the past few years, and we just look after its well-being as well. We've recently been clearing out the brush along the north side of the cemetery, which is right there on the property line of this DSH land. And the land, the topography just goes that way. So there are graves that have washed. We found headstones and footstones that have washed that direction and are, if the property lines that are showing, they're going to have to account for those headstones and those footstones. And no bulldozers or backhoes should be anywhere close to that cemetery. And who knows what kind of havoc it's going to wreak on whatever's buried nearby. We just don't know, and that's something that they're going to have to consider. Okay, that's the rest of my sermon. But again, we have oodles of questions and concerns that, as you say, you'll have to direct us to who will help us with this, who can we address this matter with, or these matters, and get some resolution and some satisfaction. Where do we go from here? Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Oh, well, there are trees that are marked to be taken down or moved, and they're very old, but they are marked by the surveyor. They are on cemetery property.
You said they are or
They are. There is a vintage, of course, wire fence that goes all the way around that cemetery. Miraculously, it has survived. And you just pull up the leaves and, 2 feet under, you can find that fence. And some of these trees that are marked are literally inside the cemetery, inside that wire fence that's been there forever. So, yes, thank you, Harry.
That may be something, obviously, you may take to make sure that, obviously, there are certain things that they can do if it's on their property, but if it's on your property, then, make sure that, their survey is accurate to reflect that it's not, just because the fence may not be, sometimes fences are not exactly in the spot on the property line, so that may be something you want to check.
Well, definitely will. We're going to be wherever a grave is, that's where property line is going to be, I imagine. And if someone doesn't have the respect for the rest of the houses and the individuals and families who live in that neighborhood, by golly, they better have respect for that cemetery. That's all I have to say about that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And I have Connie Mijos. Is that right?
Thank you for serving. I know every one of you except maybe 2. I'm here because I'm going to be buried in Lane School Cemetery, okay? And all my family is buried there. And at the very beginning, I had to go back a number of years back and get the television station to come to make them quit bulldozing down people's tombstones and throwing them away. And so we got that stopped. So, hallelujah. I see that this plot at the very base is going to be right on top of graves. Some of the houses, when you look at the picture, I just got this last night. Some of the graves are going to be right on top of a house. And so I Googled, I've learned to Google, and you can't put a house within 500 M's of a grave. So I looked up M's, and that's a meter, that's 3 feet. And so they're putting a house right on top of graves, which they can't do. I also found out on historical, because we've got a bunch of them in there in the 1800s. No, I was not born in the 1800s, all right? And so they're historical. So there's a preservation deal in Texas. I don't know any of this. I'm depending on y'all because you're the ones that are on this and learn all this stuff. You're supposed to preserve these graves because they're historical. And I want to thank them for cleaning, because I went over there the other day checking on the graves, and they had pulled up a lot of the tombstones, and it says 18, so on 18. And Jerry Kaufman, whose family dedicated it, had knee surgery, so he can't be here. What I'm wanting is to make sure that they don't bulldoze down more of the cemetery, and at the very base of it, there are graves right there, and they're putting a house right on top of it. And I don't think you can do that. I don't know. And I want to make sure that going in and out of the cemetery, when they put the those townhouses right there, I talked to the builder, and he was closing up the alley, and then he changed it because the man that sells the tombstones says you can't get in there if you don't have a way to get into the cemetery. This is a very old cemetery. The Millers are buried there, and you know, the Miller addition is in Denison. He donated all of that, and so many of the people that I know that could come are too old to come now, that would tell you who all is buried in there. But that's a very, very old cemetery. Plus, across the field was my papa's field, and that's an area, like she's saying, Lane School community goes back before Denison. I don't know if you know that. It was a community before. And where Lane School was, where my uncle was a principal for 400 years, that whole area, that's where everybody used to have. We had ice cream socials. A church was even there, a church and a school. Can you imagine? All of that brought a community feeling that she's talking about. She's one of the younger people in there, okay? We go back to where we were all a community. And the integrity of the area, we love to go to Jefferson and some of those. They've saved the integrity of their area by keeping what's happening, all the trees being bulldozed down, and I don't know how to do that. And I'm too old to do it. And I want to really depend on y'all to help keep the integrity of Denison, where everything's not bulldozed down. And we even bought an historic home here, and we're trying to keep it up. Don't ever buy an historic home, by the way. You're always keeping it up. But let's try to keep the integrity of neighborhoods, and like you said, putting 11 houses, you know, that's 22 cars in 3.27 acres. Now, I don't have to be a rocket scientist to know. Can you imagine how crowded that would be down there? I don't mean you couldn't put some homes, but 11, 22 cars? Have you been out there? Have you gone? You're in real estate, you know.
Well, my stepmom lived at 820 Lane Drive forever. I know that neighborhood like the back of my hand. That she lived there forever. So stay up here for a minute. Diane, I'm trying to figure out, how could a home be on top of a grave? There would have to be a property line, and then the homes have to be, 10 feet from the property line, or 5, or? I don't understand how a home could be on top of a grave.
So, if you're asking about setbacks, it depends on the frontage. I think it's.
Yeah, in the
6 on
picture,
side
do you see that
setbacks.
picture?
Oh, yeah, I've seen
So,
that.
I think that their concern is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, that
I
there
don't know, so no.
that there are graves along the property line for that lot 11.
Yeah,
So,
they're right there.
That maybe there were graves that could have been, I guess, technically outside of the boundary line of the grave, outside of the boundary line of the cemetery, is that?
No, those boundary lines, listen, those graves are that old, they would have been the boundary line.
Right, well, as far as just
See, but that cemetery, okay, you probably know this, I don't know. Lane School and all that was dedicated by the Kaufmans. And so it was really not to be sold, to put houses on, is the way I understand it, that you were supposed to either use it for a park. Am I wrong? Do I know? You're not supposed to sell land that's been dedicated and then sell it for real estate. You're in real estate. Can you do that?
There was a lot of acrimony back when Lane was closed, and that's a long and drawn-out story.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So the boundary's right in there. Listen, I was there when when Davy Crockett came, okay? And
Not quite.
and yeah, well, it's getting there. So those boundary lines, those fences, I'm 76. Those fences were there back and were old when I was there. So
Well, this is just a question because
I don't either. So
but I know that there were often plots behind people's individual homes where they had.
yes,
They had their own.
But they
family
still had to
burials
have-
right at their homes. So
Yeah.
I'm just curious about the history of this. Was it like a community?
it was a cemetery for all the area. Yeah, and like on the lots, I have my great grandfather's out on Cherry Mountain, but behind a barn. So they used to do that.
They used to do. So what is the name of the cemetery?
Well, it was always called Lane Cemetery, and then it got changed to Kaufman because the Kaufmans were the ones that dedicated the cemetery. So now I think it's Kaufman Lane. I call it Lane Cemetery because that was what I was raised. But I read last night in my Google that if you have a cemetery, you can't ever erase it, even if it's on property. It has to be kept, and you have to have access to it.
Well, there's unusual situations where, in the case of the cemetery that was where Lake Texoma is now.
Oh, yeah, it went under.
Then they have to very.
Eminent domain, yeah.
Move all of those headstones to another location and everything. So it can be done, but it has to be with the agreement of the families.
With a natural, you're the one, Tom, I want to call you Tom. Sorry.
I've been called worse.
So, but that's eminent domain when you have to they're about to flood, the people are fighting that too. But this isn't
This is different, but
And
Yeah.
the problem with this is it's just a plat, and
Yeah.
the state has stripped us from doing anything other than listening to feedback and trying to provide some type of productive,
yeah,
feedback to you. I mean, and we don't disagree with anything. The only thing I disagree with is the accusation that, the P and Z has committed unconscionable acts and we don't look out for the best interests of Denison. And
yeah, no.
I get so aggravated every time I hear that, 'cause I grew up here, and I don't sit up here because I don't love Denison. I'm on 3 boards because I'm trying to help Denison
Yeah.
not commit unconscionable acts. So, but we agree with everything else that you said.
Yeah,
But the
I
problem
just
is
don't know
it's
how to
just a-
protect those graves, yeah.
Right.
And my friend came by last night at 11 o'clock. I go to bed at 8, I'm sorry. So she said, please go and make sure our cemetery is taken care of. And that's what I'm trying to do. I don't know what I'm doing actually, but
No, we appreciate your feedback.
yeah, but the cemetery is historical. And a lot of the graves were lost in the cleanups when they would mow. So right at the front, like I said, we've got our new tombstone up. And I just don't know, and I hope they don't cut down that big tree at the top.
Well, if it's on the cemetery's property, I don't see.
I know, but,
Yeah, it's on cemetery property.
I know, but
They can't cut it down if it's on your property.
well, it's not on the property.
Yeah, if it's
But
not on the
didn't
property,
Denison
there's-
pass something about you can't cut down huge?
Well, there is, but it's not, I mean, if it's in a building pad or in a building site. then
They can't
there's
stop
not.
it,
I mean,
okay.
Typically, it just depends on the builder as
Yeah.
far as, a lot of times.
So if I climbed up in that
lots
tree
more
and sat
valuable if
there,
They have the trees on there, but if.
Yeah.
Well, if it's
you know,
on the property of Lane Cemetery, they can't.
it's not,
Oh, it's not.
no, no.
And if I may interject, that tree would easily be avoided.
Yeah, it's beautiful, I love trees, so,
Not even a big deal.
so, like I said, I'm here because I want to protect the cemetery, and I know y'all are the ones that, I guess, do that, right? I don't even know you're the ones that do it, but, so that's why I'm here. I just want to make sure that those graves and the drainage still that she was talking about, I don't know how, I mean, you played in that neighborhood, the creeks are down, and that's heavy drainage. I don't know how on earth they would put a house there and stop drainage, it's gonna flood something. So anyway, it'd have to. It's called common sense, you just couldn't build enough. So anyway,
They would have to address the drainage situation.
have to,
When they go through the building process, that would be taken care of in multiple different
Okay.
ways that I don't,
yeah,
I'm not a contractor, so I.
Yeah, that would have to be addressed, which,
Yeah.
you know.
and they
may
wouldn't
actually
flood the
improve things,
cemetery. That's what scares me, that it might push the water back up into that area down in there, so. That's about,
Chances are from other situations.
Do what?
When the construction's done, the drainage problem goes away because of all the things they have to do to address
yeah,
the problem.
yeah,
So there's not much you can do about the process. The construction process sometimes creates some temporary problems that will go away later, but
Yeah.
that's part of the.
I want to say again, thank you all for serving,
Well, I appreciate you saying that.
but because I don't serve. I used to.
I wish that the developer was here. It's a little bit of a cop-out for him.
Who is Humphrey? Humphrey? Huh.
Yeah, it's DSH edition, and I
Why are they putting so many? 11 houses? Why, are they going to be little tiny? I mean,
I don't know. But the problem is, like I said, it's just a plat, and if it meets all the technical requirements.
you
Tabor-
can't do
There's a
anything.
process that has to
ahead.
be addressed before we go from the replat to the developer and
Right.
final phases. So there is other opportunity to address some of those issues later.
Yeah, yeah.
We have a couple of city staff members that might be able to speak to the cemetery over there, from our Parks and Recreation Department.
Then I'll sit down. Thank you.
Cemetery foreman.
Okay.
We did.
Hi, everybody. That's all right.
Would you-
Chip Egger, I'm the cemetery and park superintendent for Denison. I will do what I can to answer any questions. All right. Oh, man.
This is what I want to show you. This is probably, you're not supposed to do this, but okay. That is where, and that's, the graves are right there. And see, that's a house, and that's the graves.
So I know where the lot is currently there, where they have it flagged and where the fence is.
Yeah.
We would just need to determine if there are no actual markers, I believe, on that side of the fence.
Yeah.
There are some artifacts that are on that side of the orange flags that are
Yeah.
located through there.
Well, there were some markers when I was growing up, so that's why I said, but don't you have to be within so many feet of a house? I mean, for a grave in that?
Not that I'm aware of. I don't have any insight.
I Googled it.
No. And what did it say?
It told so many feet you were supposed to be within, and it was a long ways,
Gotcha.
So, like I said, I don't know but I just don't want them on top of the graves, because I'm gonna be right up there.
Sure. Correct, yeah, there's, again, you can see there's an old pre-existing, like a barbed wire sort of a fence there that runs along that north property line of the cemetery. And then you can see where the orange flags are, which I'm not exactly sure if those indicate a border or if those are just marker points. I'm not exactly sure what those orange flags signify. It's very possible that it's properly. I didn't put the flags there, so I don't know exactly what the flags signify. I don't know if that's a setback line. I don't know what that is.
Isn't that sometimes marked where a gas line or something like that is?
It,
There's nothing back
with a survey company, it could just be how they were keeping their place for their next mark, when they're tied in the trees the way that they are over there. So, but there are some artifacts that look like they may be part of the cemetery that are on the other side of that barbed wire fence that we assume is the actual border of the cemetery based on this line right here. And I think there would need to be at least some research on that to see if that is part of the cemetery that somebody may have used unknowing what the borders were of the cemetery 100 plus years ago. And just a little research I think would probably be due.
Because it could be, I guess, if it, like I said, maybe the boundary lines aren't actually what was used for the cemetery, and if the cemetery was basically using that, then it could have been, a process of adverse possession or something, so forth, if they were using it and doing it over the years, so it may blur what the actual legal boundary lines were in this case.
So,
So they probably
Right.
had a survey, and I assume that that's what was marked, was they had a survey which showed, okay, this is what the actual boundary lines were, but it may have been over the years that wasn't necessary, it wasn't exact, and maybe that fence wasn't, like you said, was buried.
The Brown property that they sold to that company, don't they have to have a survey over there for that property?
I don't have access to a survey of the cemetery, but there are, I would think it's reasonable to find the surveys from the additions that happened on the south side, and then obviously the new additions that are proposed on the north side, and pretty easy to figure out what the borders are with some pre-existing surveys that we don't own currently.
That house, the Brown house, used to be a log cabin, that was one of the first ones. So that's how old that piece of property is. It was a log cabin and they built around it. That's just another aspect of history.
Thanks.
That's okay. I wish I had more answers.
Thank you.
Because we're just right now, we're in the public comment section, so I think we need to move to the.
I have just a quick question. When was the last time a true survey was run on this? Back when Lane School was tore down, there was a partial done, where they went back and found a marker that they thought was right, and then sort of subdivided it back up. But when was the last time it went from a benchmark back out on the survey? Do we know?
We don't know that. I don't know the answer to that
Well,
question.
this is something
Right,
that,
sure,
this is
right.
something that does, is required if you put in a plat. This would mean that
Well,
the
they would have had this-
current survey may not even be correct or legal.
Well, I mean, they would have had to have surveyed this portion of it.
Yeah.
What's that? Well, yeah, I mean, they would, just as far as to do the plat, it's been surveyed to do the plat. Because that's, I mean, I've got, this is from a surveyor here for the proposed plat. But as far as the boundary line's a different question.
But was it partial or was it from benchmark?
Well, in reading what we have here, what we are approving is just a preliminary plat. With this approval, the applicant will submit a full set of civil engineering plans and a final plat. So I'm guessing, since he's not here and can't explain his intentions, that's what we would be doing, that this is preliminary plat, not a final plat, and those other things would take place. So it would be something the contractor would do to save some money, because if he goes out and spends a lot of money on the survey and engineering feasibility of putting buildings on those places, that's gonna be expensive. So,
And tearing down those houses, if they're incorrectly built, could cost millions like it did down here
well,
on
that's,
the Katie building. When you came
fortunately, we've moved forward a little bit in how we go about doing things
Yeah, but I'm
nowadays.
just saying.
Yes,
if
I understand what you're saying.
When a survey is off by a couple of feet, this can cause large amounts of money later on when someone comes back and does a real survey from a benchmark like they really are supposed to do.
Well, sometimes we've seen situations where we've done we've approved a plan, and then the feasibility is that the contractor goes back and
Right.
knowingly makes choices on what land is usable and what is not. So they came to us with a plan, but they knew very well that when it got into more of the details, that land, one particular one, the land had some problems before, and they had to address those, and so they had to decide whether there was enough land that could be built on to go ahead with the project. And so that goes back to them to make those decisions. They're not gonna make something that's not gonna be good, trust me.
You must live in a different city than I do.
Why is the builder not here?
That's what I asked a while ago.
That's a good
I-
question.
Yeah,
This is about him.
it's not required to be, but.
Well, I would say a lot of times they're not necessarily here for the plat part of it.
Because, so the bottom line is, unfortunately, does it meet all the technical requirements to have the preliminary plat?
Yes,
So that-
and just to speak on the builder, he could be here, not be here for several reasons. This was on the consent agenda, and with it being on the consent agenda, he may have not thought that there were any issues.
That's true.
So I'm not, I don't wanna give him a bad
Well, that's true.
reputation based off of him just not being here.
I just wish he was here, but I'll retract what I said a while ago about not being here for a reason.
A lot of
Yeah,
times-
But I wish he was here, but.
Who is the builder? Something Humphrey.
So the,
DSH.
the applicant is DSH Construction, and we can get you that information if we need to, on who's gonna be their contractor.
Oh, we can find out.
Yeah, we can
I'll
get,
look it up on the internet, yeah.
okay.
So because it meets all the technical requirements for the preliminary plat, we have no choice but to approve the preliminary plat, because that's all it is.
Even if the surveys
Correct,
may
even if-
not be correct. Even if it's on top of the cemetery? We got a lot of ifs on the boundaries.
I completely understand, we have no power.
So that's,
Right. Lead us in the right direction. We are floundering here.
Is it the city
I don't want to
council?
say the state of Texas, because that's a generic answer.
Yes, but that may be the
Somebody
truth.
makes these decisions.
That may be the-
right.
I do know I learned on Google that for cemeteries, okay, that was last night, all right? That you can go to the historic preservation, and they rarely block things on cemeteries if it's within certain, and,
Our Historic Preservation Board really works more with Main Street, but Historic Preservation has a number of different entities that are involved with that. And so your avenue there would be the state.
yeah,
And
the
even
cemetery-
in things on Main Street, they've had to go to the state in certain situations in order to get a state representative to make a judgment. Because we're not educated enough in things like that. I mean, when I sat on Historic Preservation Board for 6 years, and we were just dealing with our downtown buildings, just our preservation area, which is basically Main Street. So cemeteries, we don't have any cemeteries downtown, so it's not an area that I have any expertise or anybody on our local preservation board would have. But that doesn't mean that the state boards wouldn't have those answers for you.
Who
And
do you call, what?
I would just go to Historic Preservation Commission at the state level. And you might check with Charlie Shear, because he's had to contact them on numerous occasions.
Okay.
You know Charlie?
No, probably, but
You can find him.
He's easy to
You can
find.
find him. Just go down to the 400 block, he's right down
Okay,
there. you can talk to me
You
after. the
can't
meeting.
build on a cemetery,
Right.
but that's not what we're doing. We're just the preliminary
But you're supposed to have so
plat.
much footage though.
Right.
And
Between the property
that's-
line, yeah, because we don't disagree with anything you're saying
Exactly.
other than the insult.
I just know-
So, I mean, I get
What we
it.
can do, Connie, is that when we get ready to approve or disapprove or table it, those
Right.
are our options, that we can put some other words in there.
Ask
And
him.
what we can do is to approve it with the condition that it is not infringing on any cemetery grounds.
Okay,
We can do that.
and he has to check on that?
Then the situation goes back to the contractor to get his ducks in a row.
Diane, what is your feedback on that?
So with a preliminary plat, I think Mary touched on it a minute ago, is that this is what they are proposing at the moment. These are legal lines. I mean, a surveyor's not gonna put their seal on it unless it's correct. But I know, I was expecting, that's what I was expecting from everybody. That's okay. I will say that preliminary plats are, as they are called, they're preliminary plats. We are approving, or whatever the commission decides to do, based off of the zoning requirements for that area. They do have to provide a full set of civil engineering plans as well as a final plat. In between the time that this is approved and those are submitted and reviewed by staff, things could change. Lines could change, lots, the number of lots could change, and less lots, more than likely, that's a possibility. But all of those things, this is just giving them the go-ahead to move forward with that. That does not mean that they can pull a permit, that does not mean that they can start building the property. They're getting the land ready to build. They're putting in their infrastructure, their utilities, things like that. I think that you probably had a question on what the next steps were, so I just wanted to guide you in that direction. Spence, what was your question for me?
You answered it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Do we check the paper? Is that where we find out what's going on? I do take the paper.
So, I'm sorry to interrupt you. When it comes to plats, these are not it's not a required notification. It's not a zoning change, it's not a replat. This is a preliminary plat that will then go into a final plat, and those don't require notifications for the surrounding areas, no ma'am. So, the best
So how
way,
do you know about it?
via the agendas, and the agendas that are posted for the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Have to come to all of these?
Our agendas are posted the Friday before our meetings, correct? So, yes, ma'am.
On Friday, the only thing posted were pages 1 and 2. You didn't get any drawings or anything. I wasn't able to print drawings off it.
Okay, it should have been this full agenda that you have in your hand.
And number 2, it just says DSH edition. You get no idea where that's located. It doesn't give you a street name or anything. When you look at the map, finally on Monday, you do see, oh, here's Lane Drive. And you get to figure it out on your own that way at the very last minute.
I'm not sure, and I'm sorry that that is what happened, but the agenda would have been posted in its entirety, just like what you have in your hand, along with the zoning map and the aerial, providing you a better location for that.
Carefully on the Fridays when they go in and check it out, but this Friday.
Okay.
So we need to make a motion to remove it from the consent agenda first, is that correct?
You don't have to. You're not
Okay.
required to.
Okay.
I think,
Unless you're going to address it separately for some
Right.
reason. You know, if the public comment was taken. and
Okay.
If you feel you need to remove it and address it separately, you can, you don't need to.
I think you have to ask if there's anybody else.
but, okay, is there anybody else that want to speak on the public comment section? All right, then we'll go ahead and close that part of it and move to the consent agenda. So are there any items on the consent agenda that want to be removed to discuss further? Or if not, I'll entertain a motion.
I believe it should be removed.
Okay, have a motion to remove it from the consent agenda. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay, so you're referring to item 3B, correct?
Yes.
Okay, all right. And so remaining on the consent agenda is the minutes from our last meeting. Do I have a motion on that?
Make a motion to approve the minutes from the meeting on April the 12th of 2022 as presented.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
And a second. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. So then we're left back to the preliminary plat for the DSH addition. And I guess on that, I wanted to clarify further, I guess, Diane. So obviously, and just for our guests here too. So on plats, you know, if a plat meets all the technical requirements, then we as a commission, the state says you have to approve it. So we don't have any we may not want whatever they're proposing there. You know, that's a whole nother story. But as long as on that paper, the dimensions and so forth, the lot sizes, all of that meets the technical requirements that the city has in place for what plats have to have, then we have no choice but to approve it. You know, that being said, you know, there may be some extenuating factors. So, you know, so the fact of what they're building there, I mean, it meets the requirements. There's not much, you know, there's not much we can do as far as that part. You know, you may not, you know, want that many houses to be built, but it's within that zoning ordinance, and the lots meet the size requirements, which is 7.5. So you have to build a minimum of.
Two-car garage.
So it's a 75 by 100 type lot, which are basically what your normal lots are in the city of Denison.
But like Diane said, there are 11 homes right now. It could be 6, it could be 2, it could be, I mean, the number could change, right, Diane?
It just can't be more.
Correct.
Right, it just can't be more.
Right.
Well, and then I guess the other question would be, the way it's stated with civil engineering plans and final plat, would that address the cemetery situation? Or do we need to state that separately?
Well, I think that's.
Because we don't want to flood my grave, okay?
Well, and
No,
I mean, that would
no,
need to be addressed
yeah.
as part of their civil engineering and is not
Right.
part of what goes into the plat. The plat is just, okay, these are what's gonna be the lot dimensions. You know, would have to be addressed in their engineering plans of how are they going to drain the water, and they can't just drain it onto the cemetery or someone else's property. You have to have a way to drain it where it doesn't create, you know, more.
I'll come back.
I hear you.
And so, you know, if there's currently existing problems, obviously that's something to take up with the city staff, you know, currently. And I don't know, you know, on the lady you mentioned, as far as if that's something that is because of what's going on around it on there, or if it's just because of undeveloped parcels like this maybe, that where the water, there's nothing there to do it, and the water just goes where it goes now because there's not been any, you know, any drainage plans addressed because the lots, you know, that property's undeveloped. But if it's a current problem, then, you know, that's something, you know, to take up with the city. But as part of the city's job, whenever they're approving things, you have to have a plan to drain, and whether that's a retainage on site or some other way through sewer, you know, or other types of drainage mechanisms, but that has to be addressed.
Right.
You know, as far as the graves, that's probably where you may want to take it from there. Because that does, and maybe there's some claim that the cemetery's boundaries are over what they were on paper, just because of what's been used. But, you know, obviously that's not anything that we here can deny it at this point over because of the technical plat, but that would affect as far as where they can build and what the boundaries may end up looking like when it moves forward. Am I correct there? As far as address it? Yeah.
I believe so, yes, sir.
But I mean, as far as legally, you know, even with that, we don't have a basis for denying the plat or tabling it, do we? I mean, obviously we don't have Julie or whoever on the phone, but.
And I'll just add on, the survey has the surveyor's phone number right there, so if you have any questions about that, I mean, you definitely can call them.
know, Chris, or, I mean, if we could use that as a basis, or do we still, you know, as far as legally, what this is a new situation for us too. We hadn't had, at least in the 7 years I think I've been on this commission, we haven't had something like this where there's been that kind of a,
I'm dimming the lights.
of a question.
Sorry
You mean
about
it's time
that.
for the encore?
Yeah.
God is speaking.
But believe me,
moving more.
people, Diane is here to protect you. She's not here to tell a builder, do whatever you want, who cares? Believe me, I am a builder. I've been on the other side of this equation. She knows what she's doing.
Sorry, to answer your question, I mean, with regard to the cemeteries, it's a really tricky line you walk. I know we just went through with the iron ore stuff, there was a lot of issues out there with,
Oh, that's
with
true.
boundaries and that property being designated specifically a cemetery. That one is designated historical through the Historical Commission, and it will always stay a cemetery unless someone petitions to have that cemetery status taken away, and that's a whole court process.
Well, Lane School is too.
Okay, yeah, I'm not familiar with that one. I just know we worked on this one, and it was a process. You know, even the cleanup up there was a process, because you have to be very respectful of, you know, not stepping on
Right.
things and not,
Yeah.
you know, not causing things to fall in, and because those settled, you know, being so old. But, you know, I can certainly have our city attorney look at that a little bit more and address that with the final plat, you know. So maybe we can even get the developer to throw in a nicer fence or something, I don't know. No, I'm kidding.
I personally would feel more comfortable if I understand that this is preliminary and we could go ahead and do that, but I would certainly feel more comfortable that that whole cemetery issue was settled before we even look at the final plat. That's just my personal feeling. I think that because I see what happens sometimes when contractors start doing their preliminary work, and they may not be respectful during that period, so I think they need to be aware that people are gonna be watching and that it needs to be respectful.
Well, we all agree with that. Nobody here wants to disturb a cemetery, whether the cemetery is a year old or 150 years. Nobody wants to. We all have respect, especially for that one. There's one on Lillis Lane that's the same way. Nobody wants to disturb any of those.
Some of this is awareness, you know, I
Right.
came across
I just don't know what
I don't
legally
either.
we could do.
You could be going for a walk near Waterloo and come across a family plot.
Yes.
And you don't realize, oh my goodness, this
Right.
is.
And that should never be disturbed
good
for any
attorney,
reason.
maybe?
What's that?
Do you know a good attorney? Can you help me with that? My great-grandfather
That's what I don't.
was one of the founding fathers of Denison.
I repeat that.
My great-grandfather was one of the founding fathers of Denison.
Who was he?
Pearson.
Okay, yeah.
And, the house that he lived in was bulldozed down and duplexes were put up.
Well, there won't be any more duplexes put in Denison.
I am all for Denison growing,
Right,
but it needs to be done in the proper way.
right. Right. Well, thank you for saying that. You're right. I completely agree with that.
And we take that responsibility very seriously.
Yeah.
That house is gone.
Well, we
It's gone.
recognize that we are at a cusp with growth in our city right now.
Sarah, you had something to say?
We recognize the importance.
Yeah,
of
sorry, I
that.
didn't put a card in, but I just wanted to make a comment. I just asked, and I don't expect anybody to know, but if on lot 11, if there is a cemetery, if there is a grave there, is there some type of law or something that states that the person purchasing that property with the house on it, do they have to be disclosed that there's a cemetery there? Is that something we have to look at?
I read it last night, yes, it does. Thank you.
Well, I think it would obviously affect what they could do on there as well, I mean, because there are certain distance requirements and so forth. So,
I just read that last night on Google, and I'm sure
you know,
it's,
so it would technically affect
you have to disclose.
whether they could build there or where they could build, you know, depending on where the location of graves are.
And Mr. Redmond, did I just hear you say there will be no more duplexes built in Denison?
Unless I'm
Well,
incorrect.
there will be duplexes,
So,
but not
Not,
by,
not
Is that what
by,
I
not
heard?
by right.
unless they are zoned for two-family duplex, or they come through this commission and city council requesting a rezone and it's approved, they have to be zoned for two-family duplex.
But you can't just go,
You can't
like
just.
before, you could automatically go build a
Before you can do
duplex.
whatever you want, you can't do that anymore.
Without approval.
Right.
So that's how we ended up with what we have there.
Yeah, that
Prior,
loophole's
prior to
been
this, yeah,
closed.
we passed,
On Oak, you know
Yeah.
what they look like on.
on December the 7th, we passed that deal that the duplexes you're talking about on Washington, they're just east of the old Lane Elementary would not be there, or I guess on the property.
Charm,
What's that?
the charm, and I'm serious about this. What about the charm of the places that are being built?
Well, that's
That
kind of,
reflects on what Denison is, the charm of what's
Yeah.
being built.
that kind of goes back to, again, whenever the state a few years ago adopted regulations against cities for
Right.
dictating what kind of materials and so forth. 'Cause used to, we could require, okay, in this area, you can only use,
You can make sure
Brick.
that those builders don't get to build.
no, we can't. I mean, if they build it up to what the requirements are, we can't say this is what you have to build. You know, this is,
I just moved from McKinney, Texas, back to Denison, and there is charm in McKinney. They don't let, or I don't know how they do it, but they do it, but they don't let houses be built that are not, charming,
well, it's certain,
especially in the downtown area, in the historical part of Denison.
yeah. I mean, some of
Diane,
it-
do we have the legal right to make the motion for this, to approve the preliminary plat, and not disturb the cemetery? Do we have the legal right to change the motion, or?
I'm trying to figure that out.
Right, that's what, yeah.
Or pending,
'Cause, you know, everyone up here would be in
pending
favor of that, I just
I'm
don't know.
trying to, I'm trying to figure that out.
You know,
Yeah, if
I
this-
had this discussion with, a similar discussion that was generic with our city manager, Bobby Atterbury, and that's exactly what he said, is that we can add our words to any approval that we make. So I feel.
Whether they have
comfortable.
any effect or not is a different story, but
Well,
we can't add.
then it's out of our hands
Right.
at that point, but we've stated what we need to for our conscience, and I think that's what we're looking at right now. That's something that we as a commission feel comfortable doing. And that would be something the contractor would know and have to take under advisement. And of course, then there's always the next steps, so anything should be taken care of from there, I would think.
I imagine it would be, and, you know, I'm not 100% sure, but I imagine it would be, similar to a motion if you were doing a replat pending, you know, adequate infrastructure or pending whatever, similar to what we've done
Well,
in
that
the
was my
past,
question
so.
to him, is how much leeway do we have, you know, when something comes up that we don't think it's right for whatever reason, you know, what do we do with that?
pending determination of gravesite locations
Yeah.
and boundaries,
Right.
cemetery boundaries.
And this is, just to reiterate, that this is not a final plat.
That's right.
Right.
So, you know, these plats are so that they can come before this commission and be looked at and determined that it's appropriate for the zoning for the area. And it does change typically between the time that you see the preliminary plat and then you get the final plat. So any motion or any kind of recommendations you throw in there, then they can address those in between the time that they have this preliminary plat and the final plat, which would, once approved, would be filed at the county. So the final plat would be. So that would be the final one.
That sounds good.
All right, any
For a
Any
motion,
further-
Mr. Chairman.
further questions,
Yeah, I think we're good.
questions among, or discussion among commission members?
No, sir.
All right. If not, then I will entertain a motion.
I make a motion to approve the preliminary plat for the DSH addition pending the fact that it does not disrupt the integrity of or disturb the graves within Lane Cemetery.
I'll second that.
I can rest in peace now.
Or the cemetery
I got
boundaries.
my tombstone now.
Or the cemetery boundaries.
Did y'all get that?
Okay, okay, good.
All right, I have a motion by Mr. Wedderine. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Susan said, seconded.
Oh, Susan, okay.
Yes.
And I have a second by Ms. Arthur. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Okay. It is approved, obviously, pending some further investigation here. All right, so that wraps up this. So we'll move to staff updates.
Thank you all for coming today.
Go ahead, Diane.
Thank y'all. All right, so staff updates, receive a report, hold a discussion, and provide direction on a request to call a public hearing to consider amending the zoning ordinance to address the non-conforming status of residential uses and lots that are located in non-residential zoning districts. So this is just to kind of get feedback before we move forward with any text amendments that we bring forth to you guys for recommendation. Just to kind of read over, several areas of the city are zoned for commercial uses but are primarily used for single-family, duplex or multifamily residences. I know that we have this called out a little bit in the staff report for these areas, but a couple of them just off the top of my head. On West Main, there's some homes that are zoned office, but those are single-family homes. You have some condos on Morton Street that are zoned, I believe, local retail. They're not zoned for the residential there, and you have an apartment complex out on Texoma Parkway that's zoned commercial. Just kind of off the top of my head, where these things came from. Under the present regulations, these residences are considered to be non-conforming and may not be expanded or rebuilt if destroyed. Currently, a property owner must rezone to expand or rebuild a non-conforming residence or construct a new house, creating a spot zoning situation. A change to the zoning ordinance is recommended to allow these residences to be expanded or to be rebuilt, or new homes constructed on vacant lots without rezoning. Staff is recommending that the Planning and Zoning Commission call a public hearing to initiate a zoning ordinance text amendment for this purpose. Just a couple items. This is informal and it's more of a discussion and just kind of pick y'all's brains. So I'll kind of go over these, and if I need to stop after the first one, just let me know. Zoning standards for new construction and reconstruction. Staff proposes that new and reconstructed houses and duplexes meet the SF5 single-family residential zoning district requirements. The commission could consider requiring a two-car garage for new houses on these infill properties, as the SF5 zoning district only requires a one-car covered parking. Condos and apartments could be rebuilt, but the number of units could not be increased. So to kind of expand on that a little bit, right now if a home is destroyed and it's not zoned appropriately for residential, they cannot build that home back. They would have to request a rezone or develop the lot as it is currently zoned. So if somebody lost their house and they wanted to rebuild it, the ordinance does not allow for that currently. We are asking that we make some kind of text amendments to allow that, and that the single-family standard be set at a SF5 single-family residential, which is our least intensive single-family residential zoning district. One thing that was not included in the staff report is that these duplexes, if they were rebuilt, a duplex was there and it was rebuilt, it would need to meet the 2F two-family duplex. It's obviously not going to meet a single-family development standards. Another thing, just to expand on the condos and apartments, if an apartment complex currently has 141 units, or a building has 30 units and that is burnt or it's lost in some kind of weather event, they could not expand the number of units. So if the complex is 144 units, when they rebuild it, it cannot exceed that amount. If the building is 32 units, it cannot exceed that amount. Do y'all have any questions on that first paragraph?
Only some of those homes in East Denison that are zoned incorrectly, if we went back and required them to put a two-car garage in, that's
The lots, that's something also to think about. It was just thrown in there. I know that, council likes 2-car garages, council likes garages, and so we were trying to kind of steer in that direction, but you're right, on those lots, it is very hard to fit a 2-car garage. So that's something we can kind of take into consideration.
Because they're living, that would cut into some living space big time.
Sorry, my Siri decided to interject.
Uh-oh.
When it comes to the SF5 zoning district, there is a requirement for a 1-car covered parking.
Yes, right.
So it's either by way of a carport or a single car garage, so, but we wanted to throw that in there just to get y'all's take on it. You want me to go?
I would definitely require a 1-car garage or a carport, but I think a 2-car garage is somewhat overkill.
Okay. And of course, they could always build up.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they can,
okay.
sure.
The next bullet is requirement for new single-family construction. To prevent the construction of new single-family houses that are isolated from other residences, the commission may wish to require that new houses can only be built where adjacent to an existing residence. So, to kind of explain this, and if it's muddy, just let me know. If you have 3 lots that are zoned commercial and they are utilized as commercial, but somebody wants to put a single-family home in the middle of them, we're not supporting that.
Right.
If they're zoned commercial and you've got a single-family home here or a single-family home here, we are proposing that the ability to build a family home in between those two be allowed. So only if they are adjacent to other residential uses.
That makes sense.
So
Makes
this,
perfect sense.
I guess my question
ahead.
would be, so in the event of like you've got a subdivision and I buy a lot in the middle of it, I could or could not build if nobody's built on the side of me.
Are you talking about a subdivision as in it's already zoned residential or it's zoned commercial?
Oh, this would be, I guess, residential. So this is only in the
It's
event of.
only in the
for
event that it's zoned commercial.
Commercial, okay.
Yeah, so you're looking at established neighborhoods rather than
Gotcha.
a new
Okay.
development. Any other questions on that one?
So they would just have to build them kind of in order, not just put one in the middle and,
Yeah, what we're trying to avoid is what we've been seeing on the east side of town since I've been here, is that, we're creating spot zoning where the surrounding area is residential. When you look at the zoning map, though, it's commercial or it's light industrial. And so we're trying to kind of find a way for developers, or in the event that something happens to somebody's home, that they're able to rebuild to how it was currently developed. These structures probably preceded whenever the blanket zoning was put in that area. The third bullet, and if you have another question, I'm sorry.
No.
Okay. Prohibiting new construction in certain major corridors. Major corridors such as US 75, Morton Street, and Austin Avenue have the best potential to attract new commercial uses and development and may not be appropriate for new single-family houses. New construction could be prohibited in the overlay zoning districts for these corridors while still allowing reconstruction and expansion of existing residences. So, to expand on this a little bit, those condos that I mentioned on Morton Street, so that is within the Morton Street overlay. However, they are an existing structure, and if something were to happen, an ordinance such as this would allow them to redevelop those condos. However, it would prohibit any new development. So someone couldn't come in and request a rezone for, townhomes or single-family homes off of Morton Street. They would only be able to rebuild from a previous development. We are just trying to protect those corridors. I think the comprehensive plan calls out for mostly commercial uses. So we're trying to keep the integrity of that, but also allow room for structures that were already there.
does the Morton Street one go, because the west part of Morton is more commercial than the further east part is
Right.
more residential.
Right.
Does the Morton Street
We did a
overlay or
reverse
so
over
forth,
there.
does it go all the way to Austin Avenue, or is it?
That's a good question. Off the top of my head, I can't, I would hate to say
Yeah.
no, but
Well-
I think it might go all the way to Austin Avenue.
Yeah,
but-
mine's a little bit fuzzy because we just did a reverse. We just zoned one for this very reason.
Mhm.
We zoned it residential where it had been commercial.
Right.
And so you could say that was spot zoning, but it really isn't, because
Yeah.
there's about a 2-block area that is fuzzy.
So if you're, Mary, just to elaborate on that, we had one on East Chestnut that came through that was zone light industrial, and that was rezoned to single-family 5, and then also another one on Crawford, where it's surrounded by local retail, and it was rezoned to single-family 5. But the structures along that line of Crawford, on that south side of Crawford, were all residential. So I think those are the two, if those are the ones you're referring to. But I believe the Morton Street overlay does go all the way to Austin Avenue, but off the top of my head, I'm not entirely sure. So,
It'd
just,
be interesting to look into.
yeah, and
So that we as a commission are clear about that area.
so our recommendation is that we're kind of seeking your direction on these issues and these proposed amendments, and for you to call a public hearing. If you have any direction for staff to go back and kind of amend any of the proposals that we have for the text amendments, you can provide those to me, and we can bring it back to you guys for another discussion. If you're uncomfortable with the recommendation to move forward with public hearing, or if you are comfortable with calling a public hearing, then we will bring this forward to you as a public hearing.
I think that, personally think that a public hearing would be very valuable, and I think we should do it. And that would give us clarity of where to go.
I mean, on the major corridors one, I guess we already have certain, since those are in the overlay districts, as far as what we can and cannot approve on it
So,
currently.
yeah, so if my memory serves me correctly, and sometimes words run together, I don't think that there is I don't think the overlays prohibit those types of uses, so that would be language we would add to those major overlay zoning districts, or overlay districts.
I think our challenge to approve the public hearing is pretty easy.
Yeah.
Y'all have any further comments on any of those?
No, sir.
There is a recommended motion. If y'all want us to call the hearing, or if you would like us to go back and provide more clarity, or if you would like another discussion at the next P&Z meeting.
Do you want me to make a motion?
Sure. Yeah, I'll entertain a motion on that.
I move to call a public hearing to amend section 28.9, non-conforming uses and structures of the zoning ordinance to address the expansion and construction of residential uses in a non-residential zoning districts.
I have a motion.
I second.
Any second? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? None? Motion is approved. Anything else, Diane, and staff updates?
No, sir.
All right. Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
First and a second. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.